All right, it's going now, and whenever you're ready to start is good,
Just like
and
so.
I will be doing any trimming that I need to do, so don't worry about that.
Yep, right down the hallway to your right.
Y'all waiting for me?
The original intent of this presentation, which is going to be condensed today, was to demonstrate the symbiotic relationship between each of the different methods of the Essene alchemy. And symbiosis is from the Greek word symbios, which actually literally means an interrelation, a beneficial interrelation. Most people today are using the term symbiosis as a codependent relationship, but that was never the intent. That's how twisted things have gotten in the universe. But remember, I was telling you about how you can make your own light. Now, this is the ash hopper that I was describing, used in America in the 1700s, or maybe earlier. But here they're just not showing you the individual layers, but they are as I described. You want to have burlap or something fairly solid in the bottom. Then you layer in your wood ash, your burnt wood ash. It doesn't matter if it's black ash or white ash or whatever. And another layer of straw or something similar. Each layer of anything that is not ash is meant to be a filter. So by the time you get something this size filled with a lot of water going through it, what's happening is that the pH is rising. And when you collect this bucket, if the pH isn't as high as you want it to be, then you save it, clean out the hopper, recharge it, pour the same water back through. Okay? The wood trees that are grown around brackish water or at the seashore are going to contain more sodium, and trees on top of a mountain that's not anywhere near a lake are going to contain more potassium. So you always have both when you do this in nature. You always have a certain amount of potassium hydroxide in with your sodium hydroxide. Sodium hydroxide is preferred, which is why we buy it, because it's much more bio-friendly to the human. People just can't tolerate potassium as well as they can sodium. There are exceptions, but generally speaking, sodium is friendlier to people. And the wet way, which is our wet method, is originally known as solvate coagula. Dissolve and coagulate. This is how they would make it from sea salt. Select, boil, and filter fresh seawater. Slowly add sodium hydroxide solution to the seawater while stirring rapidly. Bring the pH up in this manner until you reach a pH of 10.5 to 10.7. Don't exceed pH 10.78. Let the white precipitate settle for at least 24 hours and decant the clear water above it. Add distilled water to the white precipitate to wash the excess salt out of it. Let it settle and decant again above and taste it. If it's still too salty, repeat the washing step. There is actually some that's levitating inside of a cylinder. It absolutely would not settle until I stirred the whole mess and dissipated the Meissner field that it charged up on it. It's another nuclear theory about how these elements work. On to the next one. Step back. Here's the chemical reaction that's happening. Sodium chloride with water, hydrogen, chlorine, oxygen, Na, chlorine, hydrogen, NaOH plus HCl plus H2O. So that's what you have. That's what happens to sodium hydroxide after you do precipitate. Sodium hydroxide, HCl, H2O2, and it's constantly doing this, it's moving. Now, during the process itself, sodium hydroxide plus chlorine, H2L, OH, and MAU, which is a monatomic gold, add NaOH aqueous, sodium plus OH minus plus Na plus Cl plus OH plus H plus MAU precipitates is monatomic gold hydroxide, that's the easy way to say it, as a solid. Sodium plus chlorine plus H2O is left over, so that all you have left over is salt water aside from the form gold. And this was actually going on during the precipitation of the wet method that Greg is going to demonstrate for you later. That's a bust of Queen Cleopatra of Egypt, and an illustration that she drew of her gold collecting apparatus. And a lot of it's written in pigeon talk, but you notice that she's using the symbol of the Ouroboros. And what this says here, inside the Ouroboros, the translation is, one is all, and through it is all, and by it is all. And if you have not all is nothing. And she's talking about knowledge, which she's actually getting at. That's where it's written. You'll see these same characters in several different languages meaning nearly the same thing. I don't know how I got the same slide in there twice, but that's okay. So, do you have any questions about the wet method? The main thing that is different between the Great Salt Lake manna, the Dead Sea Gold manna, and the Dead Sea is that all of it's determined by its starting material. In each of the starting materials, they have a separate ratio of the elements one to another, as well as different accompanying elements such as calcium, magnesium, and silica. Dead Sea gives you some more boron, which is actually bio-friendly, by the way. And the Great Salt Lake, as I mentioned before, that's a magical M study. What it does is everything that the M3 will do, only it takes longer to accomplish. the theory is that the things that I do with the sodium burn and the live boils, this material remembers the thermal energy. So it's perceived as a higher energy supplement when you take it. Now, a friend of mine and I in Virginia, the same guy that I was telling you about, that we burned that Kennedy $50 and made gold on it. We did an experiment because we wanted to see if we could add the thermal energy to the wet method precipitate. So we made some seal oven, which was our favorite at the time. We made it from Celtic sea salt. And we washed the precipitate just like we were going to eat it. And we put it into a borosilicate tea kettle. Okay? And we stoppered off the top of the vent, put it on a gas flame, and brought it to just a simmer on a Coleman camp stove. Well, Steve is a stickler for detail. Before we started cooking this, he set his wristwatch, the clock on his oven, and the clock on the wall all for the same time within a few seconds of each other. And he told me to synchronize my watch. So, okay, we turned it on and let it cook about 10 minutes or so. We looked at each other and said, well, that's about done. Okay, we turned it off because the amount of white powder in there was actually being reduced. And we were thinking that we were losing some to evaporation. So we were hungry at that point. We went up to a place and had a salad bar. When we came back, the clock on his arm didn't agree with the clock on the wall, or the cracks me up. Oven clock. My clock, my watch was 5 minutes faster than his because I was the one operating the burner. So we literally changed space-time.
Oh boy.
Seal oven in a low fire. So don't think for a second that this simple, easy to make, easy bake seal oven is anything other than real, because I guarantee you, stay with it, your consciousness rises, your health rises, your immune system rises to the point where you won't even get a cold. And your intuitions begin, but then you'll get to a plateau where you don't feel like anything is improving. And that can go on depending upon the individual for a while. But then it'll be like somebody turned a light switch on and you're up to the next level. And some of the shifts that you go through are so subtle that you won't even notice them. But somebody that hasn't seen you in 6 months is going to say, what's going on with you? Okay? Well, from here I'm going to speed up and just take you through some pictures that I think you would like to see from the serious work, the metallurgy, okay, the things that, if you go the full circle to the full orbis, you will one day know all of it. And you can make your mana from literally anything. Literally. Because it's everywhere. Some in more concentration than others, but it's all there. To extract our gold from the earth and even from the refuse of the earth. By doing the dry method, and the ancients called them waves, not nothing. The way of doing things. And my teachers, if you say ormus to them, they say, what? Huh? It's the M state, the metaphysical state of the element. There's only one person that is in those circles is Barry Carter. He literally adopted the term ormus, and it's very descriptive. But the Essene and Avi and other people, my masters that have taught me of M state, the metaphysical state of the elements. And there's a minimum of 13 elements that do this. The dry process works best with non-metallic minerals. The more metallic the subject matter, the more difficult it is to disaggregate it and tear it apart and get the orms into solution. Metals are just so tightly knitted together that it's such a strong crystalline structure that most of us alchemists consider them largely dead because all of their energy is being used to be what they are, just to hold them together. When we take these elements out of their happy hiding places, we can concentrate them and manipulate them and use them for our own benefit and for the benefit of humanity. Do you want me to read this? Okay. The dry process overview. Collect a quantity of non-metallic minerals such as ancient seabed minerals or volcanic ash deposits. Paramagnetic rock is a good choice, but edible minerals are the safest to use. And that's because coffee filter isn't all that good of a filter, and that's what most people would want to use. Okay? So you're not really getting the possible nasties out. It's evidenced by how many times have you had grounds in your coffee after filtering? Crush and pulverize the sample to a fine powder. The finer the better, because you have a larger area, surface area to work with. Place the sample into a boiling vessel with a tightly fitting lid. High quality stainless steel works very well. And the very best thing to use is platinum cookware. You can get from kitco.com. That's KITCO.com. I hope you're rich enough. But that's the very best thing to use. Nothing will touch it. Cover the mineral sample with your sodium hydroxide menstruum, made exactly the same way that you make it for the wet method. Bring this mix to a gently rolling boil and continue well covered for 3 to 6 hours. I like to do the Fibonacci sequences, 3 to 5 hours. After cooling to room temperature, decant and filter the pregnant sodium hydroxide solution. At this point, it's a supernatant solution. The worms are in there. Tip. After decanting the solution, filter it like it is and don't precipitate it. Instead, use it to precipitate your wet method. You're getting a double whammy of worms in there. That's one of my big secrets. I just shared it. If you're using living hydroxide and you have a living salt, you have 2 life forms there. And alchemists consider these elements alive. Okay? While stirring the solution, add a weak acid solution. We use hydrochloric acid at about 18 to 20%. Slowly bring the pH down to 8.5. After it starts precipitating, and depending upon the material, it can precipitate above 11 or 11.5 without being toxic, because all of your possible Gilchrist solution was left in the pot after the boil has dragged. Here you're working with just a solution. Okay? You everybody get that? The heavy metals Gilchrist out of solution up around 12 to 13. Slowly bring the pH down to 8.5. After it starts precipitating, the pH will want to start dropping quicker and quicker and quicker. What you don't want to do is go below 8.5. And I've seen very many times, especially working with the vibhuti illumination that I make from the sacred ash from India. Once you get to about 9.5, 9.6, it starts just accelerating. And I have to totally stop adding acid and wait for it to buffer and stop. If I keep adding acid, it's going to go on down to 5 or 6. You're going to have aluminum and lead and stuff like that in there. You let the precipitate settle and then wash it just like the wet wet. All the washes are the same. And remember to leave it decidedly salty, okay? And you want to make your own hydrochloric acid?
Yeah, why not?
We can do this. It's one of the benefits of being an alchemist. You know how to do stuff and get around the government when you need to get around the government. Oops. Can you see my cursor up here?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. This flask has sea salt, dry sea salt in it, bottom flask. Up directly above it, the cylinder contains your finest oil of vitriol, which is the ancient way of saying sulfuric acid. So go to any auto parts store and buy some battery acid. Yeah. Because none of it will be in your HCl. Totally safe again, just like the NaOH. By the time your process is done, it's gone away. This angled tube is a glass tube with rubber tubulation on it, going to an upside down glass funnel that is submerged in a beaker underwater. This right here is a stopcock. Acts like a faucet handle. Turn it on to slowly drip your HCl onto the salt, the sea salt. It evolves hydrogen and chloride. It evolves hydrogen and chloride, hydrogen and chlorine, HCl. But it doesn't become an acid until it gets into the water. That's when it stabilizes and stays there. So it goes over, goes underwater, and bubbles into the water. If it starts bubbling out of the water, you're dripping the acid in too quickly. Then when you're done, you can easily make a 20% acid solution. And what's left over in the original flask is glauber salt, which is sodium sulfate. It's a laxative. It has a use too.
Now, Don, was that sulfuric acid in the top that you're dripping down, or was it hydrochloric acid? Was it sulfuric acid you're dripping down, or hydrochloric acid?
It's in this tube is dripping into the salt, sulfuric acid.
Okay.
That causes a reaction with the salt that evolves hydrogen and chlorine,
Okay.
which goes into the beaker and becomes hydrochloric acid. And since it's been distilled over, it's going to be rather pure. I wouldn't be afraid to eat it. That's, this actual picture is showing a different process, but it's the exact same thing that you use to do what I just told you.
Okay.
I want to clear up, you wouldn't be afraid to eat it. That means you wouldn't be afraid to use it in a process.
Right. Afraid to use it in a process, not at all. I wouldn't want to eat it directly, no. This is the chemical reaction that's going on in the dry method. This is what the actual elements go through, and look how similar As it precipitates, it's exactly the same formula as the wet method. You're going from a high pH to a low pH here, but going from a low pH to a high pH with the wet way, but the end result's identical. There is a difference in the energy level, we believe, through thermal enhancement because of the fire we use.
More energy. More energy.
Hmm?
More energy.
Yeah.
Because you've added heat, like we are out there with the energetic simmering. When you say because of the fire element.
Yeah. Let me go through this and then I'll go up and talk about fire. Because one of the main tools of an alchemist is his fire. But there are so many different levels of it, from the etheric, and the first manifested fire is your spark of life. It's the spark that keeps you alive. Everything before that is divine, etheric, and you're considered the lowest divine spark. All the other forms of fire below that are vulgar, like the degree of fire that boils water, the degree of fire that melts iron, the degree of fire that melts silver. They're all different degrees, and they're used differently. They're used in different ways, and they're used with a different understanding than most metallurgists would tell you. But that's a whole another. I mean, Christine and I spent a long week at the beach, me teaching her about that. Long, deep subject. But I'll put a presentation together, and I'll also correct this one. Here's another Ouroboros. This one's Asian. And talking about the process, what was dry has now become wet. As above, so below, yin and yang, male and female principles, all embodied in the one symbol. But we started with a dry material and it became wet, and it's chemically identical to the wet method. Now, pay attention to this. This was exactly the process that we're doing out there. And I had just finished doing the pH adjustment down to pH 8.5. It was at room temperature. See that again? It was sitting there like a volcano. This is Johann Rudolf Glauber. You remember Glauber's salt that was left in our flask after we made the HCl? This is Glauber. He's an alchemist as well as a physician, German. His definition of alchemy is alchemia, cooking with salt or salt fusion. This is the old school of knowledge, very wide open book for you. Remember, one of the epitomes of our art is the sodium fusion process, sodium burn, where we can actually disaggregate pure gold right at the end of the one. That's serious business. It's difficult to take gold apart. Ask David Hudson. Fusion, changing a solid body to a liquid by the action of fire. You can take the same material that we were working with in the take it out of the mortar and pestle and do what I forgot to do, sorry, and put it in a small crucible, cover it with dry live granule. Cover it and clamp the lid down with a 5-pound barbell weight. Run it at preferably 140,000 BTUs or higher till you get up to red heat and hold it there for a while. And what will happen is that dry lye will actually liquefy and boil above 850 degrees C, above red heat on the crucible. And it'll liquefy and fuse with those elements and disaggregate them, even some of the more metallic elements. Like you saw the rivets out there, and you see how the lye attacks the aluminum. Yep. So now we got the sodium burn process. A good cook shall boil water with fire, as the alchemist shall boil fire with water. Remember what happens when you put sodium into water? Bursts into flames, evolves hydrogen gas, and tries to explode. Cooking with water. These are all white powder gold from various sodium burn processes. There's a pan full of freshly cut sodium metal. It's not a very good photograph. They're actually more silvery than they look white. And this is a copper burn, if I remember correctly. And we've got a cooking full tilt boogie. I'll draw your attention to this. I'll come back to the same spot. Can you see this entity with the Egyptian hat? The light body.
Oh.
And what we were doing was the classic work
Can you show it from this direction so we
with the
can see it?
classic pure metal. And other people, alchemists, saw before that these had entities show up.
What did you point to it again?
We didn't see it because we're, okay.
Could be it.
All of this is the heat plume. He definitely has the Egyptian had upper and lower kingdom symbols on there. I've looked at it under magnification. Strange things happen.
Oh, yeah, I see that.
Well, they said Thoth was immortal, so I wouldn't be surprised.
What did they say?
Who was immortal?
Thoth
Toth was a,
Tahuti.
Toe.
Yeah.
There's some gold metal that condensed on the burner during a gold burn. Do you remember with all that heat going on the crucible, the gas is super cooling the burner. So it condensed on the coolest place around. Some of this work is trippy. There's a little flame
Yeah.
right here.
He's still there. Oh, my goodness. Wow.
And it's not a stain. I mean, that's not on, we made this ourselves from scratch.
Can I ask a question? Would that little entity be the Mahavishnu area? Your era? You know, the extended heads? Grandmasters?
See what?
Is there any comment on who that is, that entity is?
I can't hear you.
Did anyone ever comment on that entity?
who is it? Maybe it's not Toth, maybe it's somebody else.
It was
Could be, but going by the garb, you know, unless he was wearing his ibis beak, he would look, you know, upper and lower kingdom. But could have been one of the pharaohs. Could have just been a passerby ghost who wanted to dress up in drag. I don't know. I have no way of knowing. We were so busy at the time, we didn't even notice. We didn't notice them until we took the photograph. So this is a very dangerous process, and we want to have a very thorough burn, because what happens is we have to, after the burn is done, we have to wet down all of the sodium that didn't convert. And that's dangerous. When I do a gold burn, only 25% of the gold converts, and it leaves quite a bit of sodium and metal left over. And I spend the whole day slowly misting it down. Just one little, and it'll still puff up, spark, fly. You'll see it. You see here, we're getting a phase transition coming out of the crucible. Fire is actually coming out around the edges of the crucible with the weight sitting on top.
Oh, is there a weight on
Yeah.
top of it?
Yeah.
It wasn't near that high before. Yeah, with the M3, I've seen the lid levitate with a 5-pound weight. It goes whoosh, you can hear it. I like fire.
Me too.
But there's the copper burn. All of the white stuff you see is unreacted sodium. All of the copper stuff you see is copper that's burned so much that I can take one of those little pocket screwdrivers and just barely touch it and it falls apart. And totally disaggregated. Excuse me. So you can see it close up there. All of this is dangerous unreacted sodium, all the white stuff. And we're starting to mist it down. You can see bubbles in it. You can see smoke coming out of it now, if you look closely enough. That's pure hydrogen gas. That's the stuff that burns. So all this wispy smoke. There's some fire flaming up right here. There she blows. Put too much in it, and it all goes at once.
Too much water.
Which, yeah, too much water. And what happens is, while it's in the crucible like that, it's not a hazard much, you know. But with all of this smoke, you're losing a lot of your warmth, losing a lot of your M states. And there's that familiar, always have the arrow pointing to the Na+, because that's really what drives everything. And that was some M3 that was sitting on a stirrer. I was lazy that day. Unless it's settled. Hey, another warmer. For I tell this to you who are wise. When you take plants, elements, and stones from their places, they appear to you to be mature. But they are not mature until the fire has tested them. When they are clothed in the glory from the fire and the shining color thereof, then rather will appear their hidden glory, their sought-for beauty, being transformed to the divine state of fusion. For they are nourished in the fire, and the embryo grows, little by little, nourished in its mother's womb. And when the appointed month approaches, is not restrained from issuing forth. Such is the procedure of this worthy art. From Queen Cleopatra. This is a micro photograph taken through a microscope of the golden tear as it was being slowly dried. These pyramids formed in it. That is the energy of the gold from that process, pyramid energy.
And gold is your source material.
Hmm?
Gold is your source material.
Yeah, pure gold. 99.999% pure. And you see there's more than one, and they're all stepped.
Interesting, yes.
That's what's going on. It's the pyramid energy radiating out into the solution.
Is that why it doesn't look like there's a cone on the top of those pyramids?
Yeah, some of them weren't formed perfectly. Some of them are. And they have these, this looks like a side view of a pharaoh sitting on a throne. And then a circle appeared. And these needles I see a lot, they are M state, but they're not gold. I think it's an M state that's transmuted into something else. And there's more with symbols on it. I think it's at 1200x with the camera. That is a quantum oscillator. The gold oscillating in 2 dimensions like a clothes washer. Yeah, I told him, like, don't dry it all the way out, take some pictures along the way. And we actually got an actual quantum oscillator. How cool is that?
That's really cool.
Cleopatra doesn't get the last word. That's David Hudson's big theory seems to prove out. These are quantum oscillators oscillating in 2 dimensions. Once they are let go of their crystalline shell, look, that's exactly what we're seeing there. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it and learned something, and if you have some questions, don't hesitate to ask. It's about time for us to go back over to the other location.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.